It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. We're on the air this morning with Keith O'Brien, the author of Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose and the Last Glory Days of Baseball. And our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted Best Personal Injury Law Firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. We don't have Keith for a very long time today, but we did want to spend some time with him today because it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And Keith, let's start right there with how you got into the topic and why it meant so much to you, because you put an awful lot of work into this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to write a book that captured the full story of Pete Rose, and did so with unprecedented access and details and intimacy. And the fact is, Pete Rose has lived for so long that we have forgotten who he really is or who he once was. And whether we love him or dislike him, whether we cheer for him or not, he is an American icon. And so with this book, I wanted to go back and tell that full story, the rise and the fall, and the wreckage of all that, and because I think, we are still sorting through the wreckage of the Pete Rose story today, 35 years later. And, with this book, I hope, I've told not just a baseball story, but a human story, and one that's compelling for readers.
One of the things that really stands out to me as I read the book is that Pete Rose had an ability to sort of compartmentalize his three great passions in life. Baseball, of course, and women is another of his great passions in life, and gambling is another. And I'm not sure that Pete could ever delineate which one meant more to him.
Yeah, this is something that people told me many times in my interviews, and I did conduct, over 160 hours of interviews with folks, including 27 hours with Pete Rose himself until he stopped calling me back, and interviews with three different men who placed his bets on baseball. And, one thing that folks said was that Pete could separate, especially when he got to the ballpark. Ball players told me that they bring their problems to work just like everybody else. And if they're having marital problems or they're having financial troubles, they bring those with them to the plate, to their at-bats. And Pete just didn't do that. And it does sort of defy reason, because at times his problems off the field were engulfing his whole existence. But when he got to the park, he could separate. And one thing that shows that clearly is the story of his hit streak in 1978. Mm-hmm. This is the 44-game hit streak that he put together, the second longest hit streak in baseball history, the longest that had happened since Joe DiMaggio in 1941. And by the way, we haven't had a 44-game hit streak since Pete did it in 1978. And that spring and summer, when he's putting that streak together, his marriage is falling apart. He has had a child that he is not acknowledging out of wedlock. And based on my reporting, sometime around that spring, there is a meeting in the president of the Reds office at Riverfront Stadium to discuss his gambling.
And Pete he would not admit, and that was the pattern of his life, that he would not admit that one area of his life would actually be an influence on the other half. And he, for the most part, he did a great job of keeping those things separate. But let's talk about the gambling, because obviously that is where things completely crumbled for Pete Rose.
Well, absolutely. And one thing that I did in the reporting and in the narrative was, sort of lay out the breadcrumbs that this is going to be his undoing. Because even while he's, climbing to the mountaintop of baseball and, frankly, the mountaintop of American culture and becoming one of the biggest icons in America. These problems are happening off the field, and the gambling is, getting worse. And by 1986, based on a notebook that has notes of his wagers from that year, and an interview I did with the man who kept that notebook, his good friend Mike Bertolini, who placed his bets with bookies in New York. Pete is struggling in the way that troubled gamblers sometimes do. According to that notebook and my interview with Bertolini, Pete that spring is betting on 8, 10, 12 games a day. Right now, during March Madness, the college basketball tournament, he's betting on 12 games a day. That is, as any sharp gambler knows, that is not how you win. That is how you lose. And Pete does lose a lot. It's in part because of that he seems to turn to the thing he knows best. He begins to place bets on baseball, at least as early as the spring of 1986.
It's amazing. And the job that you do writing it for us, we're going to lose Keith in just a moment because he has another conversation that he has to get to. But what impressed me about it and the way that you built the whole story of his gambling, it started very early in his life, and it just was a part of who he was, and it was not something that he could walk away from or even had the desire to.
And listen, he still struggles to admit to this day whether he was addicted or not. He has given conflicting statements about that over the years. Without question, based on my reporting, he was absolutely addicted. And I don't want to make excuses for Pete Rose. He has earned all the criticism he gets. And certainly his lies about his gambling hurt lots of people. It hurt Major League Baseball. It hurt the former commissioner of baseball, Bart Giamatti. It hurt Pete Rose's family, his loved ones, at times even his friends who protected him. It hurt lots of people. But, we live in a different culture today, where gambling is far more prevalent. And the thoughts of gambling addiction are more top of mind for many people in a culture where gambling is now legal in most states. And the two biggest obstacles that a gambling addict, I'm not talking about Pete now, I'm just talking about gambling addicts in general. The two biggest obstacles gambling addicts face when being honest about their problem are shame and indebtedness. And, Pete would never be one to admit to something like shame. He doesn't like to appear vulnerable or weak. But without question, he was in debt to bookies by the mid-1980s. Those debts at times were large. And I do believe, because of those debts and his own choices, he did feel shame, and he couldn't say what he needed to say and be honest about what was happening.
It's an amazing work. It is Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose in the Last Glory Days of Baseball. And Keith has done an amazing job with it. Keith O'Brien, thank you so much. I know you got to get on to your next interview, so I thank you for spending some time with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Have a great day today.
You too.